Hello there, everyone. My name is Gracie Caleb, and today we're going to be taking a look at the arena. So, a couple things. This module actually got re-uploaded, and the whole idea before it got completely scrapped. And now we're going to be taking a look at the more complicated version of it. But in my opinion, it's much more fun. So, what we're going to do is we have three little buttons at the bottom here, and we need to go through each of these stages: attack, defend, and grab. But we need to figure out which order we're going to do. Otherwise, if you press an event you're not allowed to go to, it will simply strike. The module will solve once all events are complete, so let's get started into this module. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to actually determine the order of events based off of our edge work here, which I'm actually going to note down our entire thing that we have because a lot of it's going to be relevant. We have 4 batteries and 2 holders, a lit sig, whenever the lights decide to come back on because they hate me. Anytime now. Alright, so we got lit sig, lit TRN, and lastly, 1 port plate with a serial port on it, and a serial number of 3 Delta 5, Echo Tango, and 8. Alright, so let's take a look here. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take a look at this table. The column corresponds to the first character in the serial number, and the row corresponds to the second character in the serial number. And that will give us 2 letters, which we'll take a look at this little chart here. So our first character is a number, so we're going to highlight the number one, and our second character is a delta, and delta is a letter, but we're going to check if the alphanumeric position, being A1Z26, is even or odd. Delta in this case corresponds to 4 in the alphanumeric position, so 4 makes this an even letter. Alright, so we get Bravo and Whiskey here, and what this does is this corresponds to one of the columns and the conditions that we must use for each case. So with Bravo and Whiskey, Bravo corresponds to the number of ports that we actually have present on the bomb, which we have 1 port present. So we're going to highlight the 0 to 1 column right here. And then the Whiskey, it points to up, which points to all of the lit indicators that we have, which we happen to have 2 lit indicators present. So we're going to highlight the 2 lit indicators. And this is what we're going to be taking a look at, D, A, and G, which, if you happen to happen to realize, correspond to defend, attack, and grab respectively. So D, A, G, let's note that down. So the first stage that we're going to go through from left to right is going to be defend. So let's head on down to the defend section, which it makes clear with this little bolded message up here. So let's take a look at defend. Alright, so defend. And now that it's correct, it normally would give you a strike if you didn't press the right button. But defend looks like this. We have 5 different potential enemies that could be attacking us. We have a sword and a shield, and we have a stage counter, which corresponds to the stage that we're currently on, or the attack phase that we're at. So what are we going to do with this? So the first things first is that we need to note down which of the 5 enemies we actually have present here. So we have Scorpion, we have Skeleton, we have Goblin, we have Mole, and we have Spider. Alright, and now what we're going to do is, for this event, you need to survive 10 attacks from 5 different enemies. Each enemy has 2 things, a move pattern and a statistic. A move pattern right here, and a statistic that we must pay attention to. To know which enemy will do a move, use one of the 5 stats. The first stat is used for attacks 1 and 6. The second stat is used for 2 and 7, etc., etc. 3, 8, 4, 9, 5, 10. The enemy in which that stat is the largest is the one which will move. Now, what exactly are we going to be doing? So to know which enemy will do, to know what the enemy will do, use the move pattern and repeat it until it reaches 10 actions. And use the action within the attack pattern that correlates to the current action. So first things first is we need to figure out when each of these enemies are actually going to be attacking. So we're going to take a look at the stats here. And what we're going to do is with each column, we're going to highlight all of the options which have an enemy in them. And we're going to be taking the one with the highest stat in this case, which corresponds to Skeleton. So Skeleton will be attacking on the first move. We're going to take the second column. We have 10, 9, asterisk 5, and 2, which asterisk means practically infinite. So that means that this automatically overtakes everything. So Mole will be attacking for the second move. Next up, we have 3, 2, 5, 7, and 9. 9 takes the lead with this one. So we're going to be having a Skeleton attack on the 3rd and 8th turn. Next up, we have 8, 7, 2, 3, 13. 13, the Skeleton takes this one again. And it is important to note that each of the enemies aren't necessarily guaranteed to attack. So it's only the ones that have the stat with the greatest value, which happens to be quite a bit of skeleton in this case. So, and finally, for our last one, we have 10, 3, 11, 5, and 12. 12 takes this one once again, and we're going to be taking a look at the skeleton for the 5th and 10th move. So now that we have what each of the moves are going to be, we have to take a look at what we need to do essentially for each stage. So, so as we said before, the enemy in which the stat is the largest for this column, this first position, this second position, etc., etc., will be the one which will move, which is what we did here. To know what the enemy will do, we're going to use their move pattern. So taking a look here, and we're going to use the move pattern and repeat it until it reaches 10 actions. And then use the action within the attack that correlates to the current action. If the enemy did a move for an A, which represents an attack, you simply want to do the opposite. And what we're going to do is we're going to press the shield button to simply block it. Otherwise, if it's idle, which happens to be it's not doing anything, that's when we attack and we use the sword button. So, as you can already tell by looking at what we have here, we have a bunch of different varying lengths. Like, for example, this creeper only has four move patterns. What happens if you happen to get to stage 10 and this happens to be one of the moves that you happen to do? Well, what we can actually, what it wants us to do is it wants us to simply go through each of the 4 movements in order and then loop around to the left again and simply just keep repeating the move patterns. So it's that straightforward. So let's take a look. For our first move is going to be the skeleton, and we're going to take a look at the first move pattern represented in this move pattern here. So the first one represents I for idle. So what this means for move 1, we're going to press the sword button. And just like that, it moves on to stage 2. We're only going to do one movement or attack for each stage. So next up, mole happens to be only an inverse, or an idle rather, sorry. Happens to be an idle, so we'll always press the sword button for mole. So we're going to hit sword again, moving on to stage 3. Now, if I happen to press the wrong thing, for example, this is stage 3 for skeleton, we're going to count 1, 2, and 3. It's an I again, which means idle. If I happen to press the shield button accidentally, nothing happens. It essentially just gives you the wrong answer, and you can obviously conclude that the other answer, being the sword, is the correct one. So I represents idle, so we're going to press the sword button. Next up, move number 4, I represents for skeleton. Skeleton is move 4. I is going to be sword again. Next up for move 5, column 5 represents 12, so that's skeleton. Skeleton is going to be attacking, so we're going to use the shield. Then next up for move 6, remember it's going to be for the 10 attacks, it's going to be the first stat for attacks 1 and 6, 2 and 7. So essentially it just repeats again. So we have these 5 columns here. We go through the first 5 and then loop back around to the beginning again and just do it all over again. However, the move patterns can indeed make this module change, and your answers will be a little bit different. So currently we're at number 6. So number 6 corresponds to the first column here. So we're taking a look at skeleton, move 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 corresponds to I, which is idle. We're going to press the sword. Next up, we're going to take a look at mole. Mole happens to only have one move pattern, which is an I, so we're going to press the sword button. Then last 3 moves for skeletons. So we're currently on the 8th movement. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 is an A, so we're going to press the block to block the attack. 9 is going to be a block as well. And now, this is exactly what I mean by if we happen to go past the move pattern, we simply just loop back around to the front. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 moves. However, we're currently on the 10th move. So we need to press I, since it loops back around from the A to the I. So we're going to press the sword button, which represents I. And just like that, this part of the module has been solved. The defend button has disappeared, leaving us only with attack and grab. So that means the stage is complete. So now, let's take a look at our next move. Next move we're going to be taking a look at, we just did defend, we're going to take a look at attack. So we're going to go into attack, and now what we're going to be doing is we're going to be given 5 different weapons, and what we need to do is we need to figure out a way to deal as much damage as possible. However, what we must do is we must do the damage that is represented on the little square brackets up top here. And we have to do them in a specific order because some of the damages are equal to a previous weapon's damage, a number of letters in the previous weapon, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of different rules that are very specific here. Previous weapons damage times -1, so just be careful with that. So let's note down our items that we have here. So we have saber, we have bow, spell right, We have cannon, we have short sword, and we have nunchucks. Alright, so remember as I said before, we need to make sure that we actually reach the damage that is in the square bracket, which happens to be the maximum amount of damage is shown on the module. And what we need to do is we need to make sure we don't cause a paradox. Using weapons in an incorrect order will, of course, cause a strike, as you would expect. So just be careful with that. So let's take a look at each of the weapon names and what they correspond to the damage. So we have the saber, which corresponds to the previous weapon's damage times -1. So, and it's going to be none if it's on turn 1. So if we're actually going to be subtracting values, what we want to do is we actually want to get the most, so that we might actually be better off using this for a move, for the first move, or turn 1 rather. So I'm going to keep that in mind. I'm going to write it below. Simply because we don't want to be removing points. We want to get the most damage. However, we might have to do some quick calculations with how we do it. Next up, our item is going to be bow. Bow is actually going to be the next weapon's damage times -1. Okay, that's actually interesting. And it's going to be none if it's on turn 5. Bow actually might be helpful for turn 5, which leaves us with cannon, short sword, and nunchucks. So we want to figure out how we can get to turn 5, to 25 rather, using these weapons. So I'm going to leave this under 5 as possibilities that we can consider for later on. So our next weapon is going to be cannon. Cannon corresponds to the number of letters in the next weapon. So we're trying to go for the most damage here, which might actually be a good idea to use the short sword. The short sword is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's going to be 10 damage. That's actually pretty good. So I'm going to mark that down potentially for 2. Next up, we're taking a look at short sword. Short sword is the next weapon's damage plus the turn number, which actually might help. So let's take a look at nunchucks, which is what we have left. Nunchucks is going to be 2 on odd turns, 5 on even turns. This actually could help us right here. So we could potentially do this for 4. This could actually be either 2 or 4, depending on how we do it. So I'm going to mark 2 or 4 because we want to get that 5 on even turns. So let's take a look here. So the short sword, as we remembered before, is going to be the next weapon's damage plus the turn number. So if we happen to put this for number 3 for short sword, what we would simply get out of that would be, let's take a look here. So the next weapon's damage would be a 5 on an even turn, and we would simply be doing this on the turn number that we're currently at, which would be number 3, so that would get us an 8. Now we have a lot to consider here, so let's take a look. So now we have, let's write this stuff down. So if we were to use cannon on number 2 here, we would simply do it for we would have damage of 10, because that's the amount of letters in the next weapon. For short sword, we would have 8 damage because it's the next weapon's damage plus the turn number. So that would be 8. That would be 5 plus 3 being 8. And then we have nunchucks being 2 on odd, 5 on even. So that would only give us 5. So taking a look here, we have 10 plus 8 plus 5. It's very close to 25, so that means we probably are just doing something wrong here. We maybe need to switch up the order in some way, shape, or form. So let's take a look here. So let's figure out what we're doing wrong. I think it's very clear that we need to make sure that we're not using the saber or the bow, because obviously we're not going to have enough time or enough space to be able to use and subtract anything. So I think that saber and bow are pretty much guaranteed to be 1 and 5. I think we just need to reorder 2, 3, and 4 in some way, shape, or form. So perhaps what we can do is we can actually get nunchucks to be the next thing for cannon, and then we can do short sword to get a good weapon damage from that some way, shape, or form. So perhaps we can do nunchucks for This probably, in my opinion, is probably the trickiest of them all. Grab itself is not too bad once you understand what's going to be going on. It's definitely longer than this, but I'd say attack, because of the whole logic aspect of it, makes this probably the trickiest part of the module. Okay, so let's try and figure this out. So cannon is the number of letters in the next weapon. I think we really want that 10, so I think that these guys are going to have to stick together. So it could be potentially that nunchucks becomes 2, this becomes 3, and this becomes 4, perhaps. However, that does not help us with the short sword because of the fact that the number of weapons damage plus the turn number. If we take a look at the bow is going to have the next weapon's damage times 1, which means it's none, essentially. But that does give us a guaranteed, this does give us a guaranteed 4, but we don't really need that. So let's just try it out. Let's just see what we have here and see what we can get. So the cannon, so we want the nunchucks, is going to be 5 on even turns, so it's still going to be 5. The cannon is going to be the next number of letters in the next weapon, which is still going to be 10 because we reordered the short sword and the cannon. And next up, no, I think I see what we have to do here. So what we need to do is we need to actually order the short sword before the cannon so that we can actually get the same amount of damage it does from the nunchucks. So let's actually put the nunchucks after the cannon. So let's perhaps do cannon for 4. Let's perhaps do cannon. So we're going to do. However, we're going to lose our nunchucks being on an odd turn, so this likely has to be 4. So you have to be 2, you have to be 4, and you have to be 3. So the number of letters in the next weapon being nunchucks 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, which happens to be a pretty good number. So 8 would be the next damage for cannon. Oh, and here we go. So now short sword being the next weapon's damage plus the turn number. So we're going to use it on turn 2. We're going to add 8 to it, so we're going to get 10 from that damage. And the nunchucks being on an odd number being 5, which happens to give us the exact same numbers. Gosh dang it. So that might mean that we actually might be using the saber or the bow in some way, shape, or form. And let's take a look here. I don't think we want an even number present. We need to make sure that they're like it's 2 evens and then an odd, which in this case we actually do get. But I'm obviously doing something wrong here. Previous weapons damage times -1, which doesn't help us. I mean, it really doesn't help us. Oh, because I spelled it wrong. That's why. It's nunchucks. So that's my bad. So if we count the number of nunchucks now that we have now, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So we have 9 in that letter, so that's going to become 9. Short sword would have the exact same weapon's damage as that would be the next weapon, which would give us 9, because the next weapon we would use is cannon, and then we would add the turn number, which would give us 11. And if you can't already do math in your head, we have 9 plus 11 plus 5 gives us 25. That's my bad for actually spelling it wrong. I just totally thought that it was just right, and that was actually our mistake here. So now that we've determined our order, let's actually start plugging stuff in. And it's important that you use it in the exact order. So we're going to use Saber. Saber gives us the previous weapon's damage times -1, or none if it's on turn 1. So we're going to use you. Then we're going to use Short Sword, which gives us the next weapon's damage plus the turn number, which is going to be 2 for currently right now. The next weapon's damage is going to be Cannon, which is 9. 9 plus 2 is 11. So we're going to use Short Sword. Then we're going to use Cannon. Cannon for number 3 represents it's the number of letters in the next weapon, which Nunchucks has 9 of them. So we're going to use you. And then lastly, Nunchucks is being used on an even turn, so it's going to be 5. And then finally, we're going to use Bow, which happens to be the next weapon's damage times -1, or none if it's on turn 5. And just like that is a solved stage. Let's continue on to our last stage, Grab. As you can tell by the last button being present down here. And now we're going to be represented with, now this module is going to be represented with a series of 3x3 different numbers that represent different amounts of money. However, this actually doesn't represent the amount of money each button truly has. So for this event, you must collect as much money as possible by using the 9 buttons. There is an amount of money under each button, which is collected after it's pressed. Note that the numbers on each button is not necessarily the amount of money you will collect from said button. The number of times you will be able to collect the money is unknown, so it is advised you press the buttons in descending order from of their money amounts. You start from greatest to least. And to figure out how much each button is worth, we're going to find the diagram corresponding to the last digit of the serial number below. If the last digit is 0, use the digit earlier in the serial number until there is no longer 0, and if all digits happen to be 0, use diagram 9. So let's take a look. So we have 8 as our last number here. So 8 as our last digit is going to be corresponding to this right here. And what this does is this gives us an operation to do in some way, shape, or form. And what we're going to do is, in the below diagrams, the letters R through Z represent the first and 9th positions on the button in reading order. So to set this up, we have through the alphabet, we're going to go through Romeo through Zulu. So we have Romeo, Sierra, Tango, Uniform, Victor, Whiskey, X-Ray, Yankee, and Zulu. We went through the alphabet in reading order. So we have Romeo, Sierra, Tango, Uniform, Whiskey, Uniform, Victor, Whiskey, and then X-Ray, Yankee, Zulu. And we're going to use this in some way, shape, or form of some calculations. So now, it is important to note that this includes lunar addition and lunar multiplication. I will include a link to my decimation tutorial, which explains how both of those work. It really does it well, in my opinion, and I hope it does well, because, I kind of tried to do that. But in this case, we're taking a look at lunar addition, and what we're going to do is each of these letters correspond to 2 positions of which we're going to do that calculation with. And for those of you who aren't familiar with lunar addition, which is what we're doing here, and lunar multiplication corresponds to this X over here. For lunar addition, it explains also, it also sends you to the decimation manual. Lunar addition corresponds to when adding 2 digits, the result is the higher of said digits. So for example, let's actually take a look at this first one here. So Zulu and Victor. Zulu corresponds to 70, which is in the bottom right here, and Victor corresponds to dead center, which is 43. 70 plus 43 for this first one right here. We're going to take the higher of each of these digits in these positions. So 3 is right here. 3 is greater than 0, and 7 is greater than 4. And that's going to be our answer for that bit right there. Next up, X-ray uniform. X-ray uniform is 50 and 77. In this case, 7 is the greater one here, since 7 is greater than 5 and 7 is greater than 0. So 7 is going to be for top middle. And this corresponds to each of their respective positions on this little 3x3 grid. This is top left, this is top middle, this is top right, etc., etc. So next up, Tango and Romeo. What are we going to do with this? So Tango corresponds to 22. Romeo corresponds to 84. 8 is greater than 2. 4 is greater than 2. So our number is going to be 84. Next up, Sierra X-ray. Sierra X-ray is 66 and then 50. 66 happens to be both greater than 5 and 0. So 6 is greater than 5. 6 is greater than 0. And it's just like that. It is 66. That's how lunar addition works. It's pretty straightforward, actually. So let's take a look here. Whiskey Zulu. Whiskey Zulu is 74 plus 7, 0. 7 and 7 happen to be equal to each other, so that means simply just that's 7. And then 4 happens to be greater than 0 for the ones position, so if 4 is going to be in the ones position, so 7, 4. Romeo Sierra will be our next one. Romeo and Sierra, 8, 4, and 6, 6. 8 is greater than 6, so we'll mark that for the 10th position. And then 6 is greater than 4, so it's going to be 86. And for our last bit here, we have Uniform Tango, 77 and 22. 77, as you can already tell, is greater than both the 2 and the 2. So it's going to be 77. Then Yankee Yankee, so that's just the exact same thing as you would expect. It's simply just 9, 8. And lastly, Victor Whiskey. Victor and Whiskey is going to be 43 and then 74. 7 is greater than 4, and 4 is greater than 3 for the ones position, so it's going to be 7, 4. And just like that, we have each of our values present for each of the grab ones. And what we're going to do is we're going to go through this in descending order until the module says enough. Now that module, that button count that we have to press is random, so we might have to press all of them, we might have to not press all of them. So taking a look at what we have for each of our values, we have 98 in the bottom middle. That's the greatest we have so far. So bottom middle. Then next up we have 86, then 84. Let's press those two. All right, nothing yet. Then next up, we have two 77s. We're going to press these guys. You can press them in any order. So we're going to 77, 77. Oh, and just like that is a solved module. We didn't have to press the 74 and the 74 or the 66 and the 73 because simply it just said you're done. Let's take a look at one final example, as this module is pretty tricky, and in my opinion, the attack phase is easily the hardest. So, as you can see there, I spent a little bit trying to figure out what it was. That happened to be a really easier example. I just happened to misspell nunchucks because it's very important that you make sure you count the weapon's name because there's a lot of rules with the weapon's name. So let's pop up one more example to make sure I'm recording. I am indeed. Alrighty, let's pop up one final example. Hopefully we can get a different case for grab. For one, it's going to be simply adding the first and the second. For the second, it's going to be the first minus the second. And it doesn't say anything about negative, so simply keep it negative. For 3, the first and the second are multiplied together. The 4 is going to be larger divided by smaller. And it gives you the little what the symbol each means, so that helps. The next up is going to be for 5, larger modulo smaller. For 6, we're going to concatenate the first and the second together in that specific order too. That one has to be very specific with that order. You have to be very careful with that. I'll make sure you do the X-ray and then the Sierra. 7 is going to be the digital root of the first times the digital root of the second. 8 is the lunar one that we just did for the addition. And 9 is the lunar multiplication, which is probably the trickiest of them all and most annoying. So let's get our edge work first. So we have 2 in 1, or no, 3 in 2, excuse me. Lit SND, unlit Mike Sierra Alpha, and that looks like that's it for everything. The serial number of Foxtrot 90, Golf Alpha 7. All right, and let's figure out what order we're going to be doing this in. So our first character in the serial number is an even digit, or even letter in this case, because it is a foxtrot. Foxtrot corresponds to 6, so that's an even letter. Next up for the second character is going to be a 9, which happens to be a number. So we're going to use Romeo and Kilo, which happens to be the other two that we did not use before. So Romeo corresponds to up top, as it says right here, pointing to the right. And the column corresponds to the number of batteries that we currently have. So we have 3 batteries currently, so we're going to highlight the third column here. And then in the kilo for the row that we're going to determine here, we need to count the number of unlit indicators we have present, which happens to be 1, since we have 1 unlit Mike Sierra Alpha present on the bottom. So our order is going to be attack, grab, and defend. AGD. Alright, let's get the annoying phase out of the way with attack. And we have a damage of 42 that we need to achieve. So we have Catapult, Saber, which might be just a guaranteed 1 again, because we're definitely going to need a lot of damage here. Bombard, make sure I spell all this right again too. Sias, might be pronouncing that wrong, my bad. And then lastly, the Battering Ram. Alrighty, and these are the weapons we're going to be using here. So Saber, if you remember, is going to be the previous weapon's damage times -1. I'm probably just going to assign this to the first move because of the fact that it does want you to get rid of points here, and if it's none if it's on turn 1. So let's consider that. We have the Catapult. The Catapult, I'm going to mark you as well. The Catapult is the sum of all damage done after this weapon. So this actually might be good to do for number 2, because what we can do is we can do the Bombard, the Sias, and the Battering Ram, and actually get the sum of all of that stuff together after all that damage is done. So let's potentially mark that down for number 2, because that's actually going to be really good for big damage if we can get it. Next up, we have the Bombard. The Bombard wants us to do the next weapon's damage. Pretty straightforward. Next weapon's damage, we can determine that. That can pretty much be anything guaranteed here. So 3, 4, 5. Let's figure out the Sias and the Battering Ram here. The Sias is the number of letters in the previous weapon. Now that might be really good with Battering Ram here because that's a lot of letters. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That's a lot. So if we happen to use this on 5, for example, we could simply get a multiple of 12. And let's take a look at the Battering Ram. I'm going to mark down the damage if we happen to do it on 5 will be 12 in this case. And the battering ram wants us to do 6 minus the turn number, which if we happen to do this for number 4, 6 minus 4, which happens to be the turn number that you would submit this on, is going to correspond to 2. And if we happen to use this for, if we happen to leave Bombard for 3, let's take a look at what that damage does. Bombard is the next weapon's damage, which the battering ram is going to be 2. So we might have to do some switching around here. And let's take a look at what we have here. So we have the catapult, which corresponds to the sum of all damage done after this weapon. So we have catapult being, we have 2 plus 12 plus 2 for all the damage that we've done so far, which gives us 16. I can already tell you that's not enough. Because of the fact that if we times this by 2, it comes so close, yet so far. So it's very likely that we actually might have to do the Sias for methods which the battering ram and the bombard together. So this may be 4, and this may be 3. The Sias corresponds to the number of letters in the previous weapon. The number of letters is going to be bombard, so that's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that would change you to a value of 7. The catapults, as we said before, we've already done that. The bombard is going to be the next weapon's damage, which is going to be 7, so that's actually perfect. So we do get a 7 out of the bombard because Sias is going to be the next move, which corresponds to that. And the battering ram is going to be 6 minus the turn number, which gives us a 3. Might better our chances here. So let's take a look. 7 plus 7 plus 3 gives us 17. 17 is now going to be for the catapult. If we add 17 to this, again, we're getting closer, but it's not really working for us. So let's try and figure out what we can do here. We probably want the battering ram actually to be as low as possible because of the fact that it is 6 minus the turn number. Who knows if that's actually really affecting it at all. I do believe that catapult still has to be a number 2 because of the sum of all damage done after this weapon. So perhaps what we can do is we can actually switch up the order a little bit. The bombard, I can already tell you, has to be, it can't be 5. That's already guaranteed. So we're actually just going to mark it as either 3 or 4. So that next number of letters in the previous weapon, perhaps we can change you to 4, and perhaps we can change you to This is an interesting one. I will say that. This is very, very interesting. Because effectively what that would do is that would give us an 11, and then that would give us 3 again, if we happen to keep that at 3. And change this to 5. Change you to 4. Yeah, the bombard gives us the next weapon's damage, which happens to be actually nothing. Oh, wait, that actually gives me an idea. So we can use the bombard, which happens to be we can do this before the catapult, which actually, let's think about this right here. So we happen to do the catapult for number 3, but we happen to put the bombard for number 2, because what it's going to do is it's going to correspond to the next weapon's damage. If we get a lot for catapult here, bombard is essentially going to be doing the same thing. So we can put Sias for number 5, corresponding to the previous number of letters in the previous weapon, which gives us battering ram for number 4. Let's try this out. So for catapult, we're going to wait on that, and same thing for bombard. Let's focus on the Sias and the battering ram. So the Sias, we said the battering ram had 11 in it. I'm going to make sure of that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Let me actually count that again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That's going to be 12. All right. So Sias, the previous weapon has 12 letters in it, being the battering ram. And the battering ram is going to be done on the turn 4. So we're going to do 6 minus 4, giving us 2. So hear me out. Let's calculate this. So essentially what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to total up 12 plus 2, giving us 14. 12 plus 2, giving us 14. 14 corresponds to the sum of all the damage done after this weapon for catapult. And then taking a look here, for bombard is going to be the next weapon's damage. If it's done in turn 2 and catapult is up next, that's going to give us 14. And let's add this up. Let's see if we actually get an answer here. So we have 14 plus 14 plus 12 plus 2. And just like that, we get 42. All right. And now what we're going to do is we're going to do it in this order. So we're going to start with Saber, because Saber, most often than not, is pretty much going to be in the first turn. So we're going to use Saber. Then we're going to use Bombard. Then we're going to use Catapult. We're going to use Battering Ram. And then Sias. Alrighty. So now we're going to head on over to Grab, as that is our second letter here. Now let's take a look. So we currently have our last digit being a 7, which corresponds to down here. So we're going to do the digital root of the first times the digital root of the second. So taking a look, remember we're going to do draw this out as Romeo through Zulu in reading order. So we have Romeo, Sierra, Tango, Uniform, Victor, Whiskey, X-Ray, Yankee, Zulu. All right. And for our first one in the top left is going to correspond to Romeo and X-Ray. Romeo and X-Ray is going to be 78 and 16. So 7, we're going to do the digital root of the first one multiplied by the digital root of the second. And for those of you who aren't familiar with digital root, it's simply taking, for example, 78. We're going to add all the digits present in the number up until we are left with a single digit. So 7 plus 8 gives us 15. 1 plus 5 gives us 6. Taking a look here at 16, 1 plus 6 gives us 7, and we're going to multiply this 6 that we got from 78 by 7, and that'll give us 42. I'm just simply going to speed this up. It's pretty straightforward of what it asks you to do, so I'm just simply going to do a lot of this stuff in my head. So we have the Uniform Zulu, which is 6 and 0, so 6 times 6 gives us 36. Then Victor Tango is 9, 7 plus 9, 0, so 9 times this by 9 plus 7 gives us 7, so 9 times 7 gives us 63. All right, next up for middle left, Tango and Whiskey is going to be 9, 0, and 8, 7. So 9 times 6 should be 9 times 6. Gives us 54. Just make sure 8 plus 7 equals, yep, so 1 and 5 equals 6. Perfect. Next up, Yankee and Uniform. 4, 0 plus 6, 0, so 4 times 6 gives us 24. Then X-Ray Yankee is 1, 6 plus 4, 0. 1, 6 times 4, 0, so 1 plus 6 is going to be 7. 4 plus 0 is 4, so 7 times 4 is going to give us 28. On to our last row here. Sierra. Sierra is going to be 17, so 1 plus 7 is going to be 8. 8 times 8 gives us 64. This is simply just doing the same number again. Next up, Whiskey Victor. Whiskey Victor is 87 and 97. 8 plus 7, which we did before, is 15, so it's going to be 6. 9 and 7 is going to be 7. So 6 times 7 gives us 42. And lastly, Zulu and Romeo. So 2, 4 plus 7, 8. 7 plus 8 gives us 15, so that's going to be 6. 6 times 6 gives us 36. All right, and just like that, we have our values for each bag in each position. And now we're going to go from, and we're going to go in descending order, starting from the topmost here. The most that we have present is going to be 64, then 63. Let's click those two. So 64, then 63. Then next up we have 54 present. All right, still wants us to keep going. We have two 42s present. So we're going to click U2. All right, still wants us to keep going. Next up we have 36. We have 2 of those present. All right, and it didn't want us to click the 28, so it stopped us there. And now onto our last phase, probably the easiest of them all, defend. All right, let's take a look at the enemies we have present. So we're going to correspond each of the stats with each column. So we have the skeleton, we have the Reaper, we have the Mole, we have Goblin, and we have the Mole's dad. So we're going to go column by column and figure out which one of these has the highest per column, and which means that that's what turn it's going to be on. So we have 1, 8, 9, 0, and 11. 11 is the highest one, so Mole's dad is going to be going this turn. Next up, we already have Mole. That's practically infinite, so that's already going to be guaranteed to be the Mole for the second part. Next up, 5, 7, 9, 11, 12. The Mole's dad is going to be taking over for this one here. So Mole's dad is going to be on move 3. Next up, we have 2, 3, 13, 0, and 12. 13 is going to be our winner here, so Skeleton's going to be on turn 4 and 9. And lastly, 11, 5, 12, 7, and 8. 12 is the highest of these guys here, so that means Skeleton is going to be on turn 5 and 10. Alright, and this is the way the module is going to look. So let's begin. So for the first move, we're going to have the mole's dad attacking. So we're going to want to block it with the shield. Next up, the mole is going to be attacking, but it's going to be idle, so we're going to want to press the sword button. Next up, mole's dad is attacking again. This is the third movement. However, we've gone through each time. It's going to loop around. So 1, then 2, then 3, and so on and so forth. It's pretty straightforward. So the mole's dad is going to be attacking. So we're going to block it with a shield. Next up is going to be skeleton, turn 4. Turn 4, and the move pattern corresponds to 1, 2, 3, 4, corresponds to an I. It's idle, so we're going to press the sword button. The next up for turn 5, for the skeleton again, we're going to press, it's going to be attacking, so we're going to press the shield. And then back to the first column here. The mole's dad is going to be attacking for turn 6, so we're going to block it with the shield. The mole is going to be idle, so we're going to press it with the sword. The mole's dad is going to be attacking once again, so we're going to press the shield to block it. And lastly, skeleton for move 9 and 10. So let's figure out what we're going to be doing here. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. On move 9, it's going to be attacking, so we're going to block it with the shield. And then looping back around to the India, we're going to simply hit it with the sword and solve the module. As always, thank you guys for watching. Remember to stay crazy, stay cool, don't die in the arena, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.